Welcome to episode 167 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 15th year, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to listeners Kim in Kansas, Tiki in Maryland, Stephanie in New Hampshire, and Angela in Virginia. Connie in Pennsylvania was kind enough to write. She said, "Good morning. I just finished listening to the podcast about teaching research in a middle school setting. Such a reaffirming podcast. It is comforting to know that other middle school librarians face the same challenges as I do when teaching research to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. Thank you to both of you for an enlightening listen." And friends, if you haven't listened to episode 166 last week, my interview with Megan Tressler, teaching research in middle school, it really is fantastic because all of us teach research to our students just at different grade levels. And I'll tell you what, if you're looking ahead and interested in interviewing for a middle school position, this would be a great way to do a little bit of that homework before you interview. Friends, I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook. On Twitter, my handle is @LMS_United, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. Friends, I'm always looking for ways to bring in more listener voices onto the podcast, and here might be the opportunity you're looking for. If you are tuning in around mid-March 2022, I have an opportunity, and this will be for the month of April. I am looking for those of you who have some great ideas for surviving the last weeks of school to come onto the podcast and record a 5 to 10 minute sort of things that you do to make the end of the year go more smoothly. And given that our school year ends sort of in this sort of window between mid-May and the last week of June, if you can believe it, and I'm talking about schools here in the U.S., I'd like to hear from you because I think this is a time of the year where we really find ourselves being pulled in many different directions. So I'd love to get your feedback. I'm looking for interviews, really informal. Just let's sit down and talk about the things you do to help your year come to a close. Or if you have to start setting up for summer school, what kinds of things are you doing? Because I know, listeners, we are all in this together. So please reach out to me, email the podcast, and we will find a time in the evening between 7 and 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll do a quick little call, and it'll be a lot of fun. Thanks so much, everybody. And now, a word from our official sponsor, Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning Pebble Go research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children. I am so excited to be working with them. And now for a segment I like to call Why I Love Capstone. And I'll tell you what, this is some really helpful information for those of us, especially who are teaching younger students, and we have a scary section in our library. And I have been on the receiving end of some concerned parent emails because my students checked out books which parents decided were too scary. And so I love that Capstone is sort of responding to this very familiar challenge that some of us have faced. And I've included, friends, a link in our show notes, a direct link to the Spooky Stories, this page, and it gives all these fantastic resources, including an infographic, because it's going to defend the importance of having scary stories in your collection, regardless of the age of your students. And when you click on this link, I really love it because it does walk through some really important reasons why our readers as they grow more confident in their reading, do include and should not be discouraged from reading scary stories. And so there's a great infographic because reading scary books, it builds our students' resilience and our understanding and their control and confidence. And this is all important for students to develop not only as readers, but as young people. And I love this, the next section they have, adults, don't be frightened. Kids love scary books. And, this is something that we see. And the last thing we want to do is keep fun books out of the hands of kids. And friends, of course, there is a link at the bottom of the page, and you'll be directed to a ton of age-appropriate scary stories. And I want to first highlight one set, which is the You Choose Monster Hunt. And this is, as you know, by listening to this podcast, I love the You Choose format. They were always the most popular books, which flew off the shelves. In this case, we've got You Choose Monster Hunter. We've got the Chupacabra. We've got the Kraken and the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot. So I want to make sure that you know about those titles. Friends, I could never keep ghost stories on my shelves. They flew off every time we got them back from our readers. And in this case, we've got 4 books that I think would do really, really well in our upper elementary collections. That would be our Ghosts of the OK Corral and Other Hauntings of Tombstone, Arizona. We have The Phantom Soldiers and Other Gettysburg Hauntings, as well as The Alamo Ghosts. And this one was fun for our Texas librarians, The Alamo Ghosts and Other Hauntings of San Antonio, Texas. And finally, for our New York librarians and their readers, we've got Aaron Burr's Ghosts and Other New York City Hauntings. So friends, I think we ought to make sure that we give the kids what they want. And in this case, scary stories are fantastic because they build in our young readers this love of reading. And that's what it all boils down to, right? Friends, we're so lucky because Capstone is offering listeners today of School Librarians United a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone Interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. And now for our episode, Training and Retaining Volunteers, and my conversation with Liz Wysong Hoffart, Ashley Meyers, and Katie Ohnoutka. Liz, Ashley, and Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
So, Liz, thank you so much for agreeing to join us. Would you please introduce yourself and describe where in the country you work, your current library? Tell us a little bit about a typical day in your world.
Sure. My name is Liz Wysong Hoffart, and I am a librarian, elementary librarian in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I have been a librarian at my school for 8 years, same school that I was a third grade teacher for 13 years prior to. And I went to that school as an elementary student, did my student teaching there, a practicum there. So I pretty much grew up there. And so that's my story.
Fantastic. And, friends, guaranteed, I know that I've met several people now from Nebraska, and I can guarantee you that there are other schools in the neighborhood. Liz, it sounds like you really just could never leave. You loved your school.
It's true. And I actually live like 8 houses away, which is pretty amazing. So
I can't say that I have ever talked to somebody who has had nearly the attachment to their school as you have. So somebody's doing something right in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Well, and you would think a lot of people don't know much about Nebraska, but Lincoln is the second largest city in Nebraska. So it's not like we're a really small town in Nebraska. So there's about 50 other elementary schools in our city. So.
Wow. That's okay. All right. We're myth busting here while we're also talking about library, learning all sorts of things. So Liz, I am curious. So could you tell us a little bit about your schedule and what kind of teaching expectations do you have in your program?
Sure. We have 540 students, kindergarten to fifth grade. So I have about 24 classes a week that I teach. Every day I have 5 classes. I'm on a specials rotation. So I teach them for 50 minutes. So every hour, and I have about 5 minutes in between each class. I have a half an hour lunch and a 50-minute plan period. And then it goes again. So
Now, listeners are going to want to know, do you also have recess duty or bus duty or dismissal?
I do. I have recess duty. Every 4 weeks, I have after school duties, and I have lots of other committees and fun things like that.
Got it. All right. Fantastic. Now, Liz, you and I could have easily have recorded this conversation with just the two of us. However, you had the inspiration to bring 2 of your community volunteers in with us. Would you please share with us who you've brought with you today? Because you have quite a team that works with you during the school year. Am I right?
I do. A little backstory before I introduce you. I've been a school librarian for 8 years, and for the first few years, I had a full-time para in my library, and due to budget cuts and restructuring, they weren't able to keep my para on, and being in a teaching rotation all day, I knew that I needed to have that second person in the library, and so I was bound and determined to find a way to do that. So I said I was going to start a robust volunteer program. And lo and behold, I was blessed with lots of volunteers. And I invited 2 of my great volunteers to be a part of this podcast. One of them is Katie, and the other is Ashley.
Fantastic. So let's start with Katie. Katie, would you let us know what is your connection to the school? I'd like to know what kind of volunteering, if at all, you've done in the school before you discovered the school library.
My connection with the school is right now I have one child who goes there who's in first grade, and next year I will have a kindergartner. My father also used to work at the school, and my husband went to the school. So we're neighborhood people as well. Prior to volunteering in the library, I had not done any volunteering at the elementary school.
Wow. And, how about you, Ashley? What brought you to the school? And did you do any volunteering in the school before you landed in the library and decided you weren't going to leave?
Well, because of my unique situation, I've got quadruplets. I wasn't able to do much volunteering with my oldest. I didn't start until my youngest ones were in kindergarten, and I actually started volunteering in their classrooms and in the library at the same time. So it all kind of started with the library.
Well, and you know what? For some of us, we realize how good we've got it, and you never want to leave. I'll tell you, I felt that way as well. So, Liz, bringing volunteers into our spaces is sometimes a solution born out of necessity. I think you started to talk about this, but how long had you been in the library before you decided that recruiting was something you were going to need to do?
It was probably, my 3rd year in the library. I started having an occasional volunteer that would come in, and it wasn't a regular thing. And by my 4th year, I knew I needed to have regular volunteers. And then as soon as they told me that my para wasn't going to be able to be there, I knew it was an absolute necessity. I couldn't do my job without volunteers.
could you tell us what was sort of that moment when you said, this isn't working for me? My kids deserve better. Was there, what aspect of your, the library was not getting done and you realized something's got to go, something's got to give, and this isn't sustainable?
Yeah. Well, I started my really big volunteer push the year before COVID. Mm-hmm. And then when COVID hit, we couldn't have any volunteers, and we were still expected to do everything. And we besides the 1 quarter of being out of school, from March to May, 4th quarter of 2020, that was the only time we went remote. Otherwise, we were hybrid. And so we were in school that whole time, and some kids chose to be home and some chose to be in school, but we were not able to have any volunteers. And between my family and me and my students, the program was not nearly as great as it is when I have my volunteers. And I just know, for me to be the best librarian I can be, having volunteers in there is crucial, because I can attend to the needs of my students. My volunteers help attend to the needs of the students. And then when I'm teaching, then they can help with the administration in the shelving and displays and all the extra stuff. But with the 5 minutes in between classes, there's just no way.
Who knows about being on a fixed schedule, you've got that 5 minutes isn't really there because, first of all, you've got the individuals who are chronically early for their special and chronically late. And I don't know why it's the same people, but they drop off incredibly early and to kind of give you the wave. And then they're late picking up, and you're like, no, that's not right. And I've worked in schools where there was that 5 minutes between classes, but that was almost worse because the teachers knew that you had free time during that 5 minutes. I'm like, no, there's nothing free. It's like Grand Central Station, people coming in, people going out, and you think it's going to be better because you got that 5 minutes, but it's almost worse because you're like, but it's not my 5 minutes. I'm people coming, people going. And so, no, I'm having a lot of flashbacks to how my career started. So Liz, I am curious because listeners would want to know, could you share with us how you went about getting administrative approval to bring community volunteers into your space? And I will share with you why. Because when I went to my administration and said I would like to have volunteers in the library, and for me it was, I had 7 classes a day, and so 7 carts a day would be coming in, and my first class started at 9. I can't do all that. And my administrator said something really curious to me, and I think it's very telling, but that my administrator said, aren't you afraid that if you bring in parent volunteers that people will think you're not doing your job? And I'm like, oh, yeah, see, what I really wanted to say was that shows you how little you know about what I do all day. I did not say that, but I did make sure that I wanted to make sure that we sort of established that I might do my job better if somebody else were in there helping me get ready for those classes that were coming, ready or not. So Liz, let's just be clear. When your volunteers come to your school, there is a procedure by which they get cleared, and they have to have a background check and all of that, all the fun stuff before they can step foot in the schools.
Yes. Our district really believes in community schools and having our schools in our neighborhoods. And before COVID, especially, it was really important having a good community relations and parent relations with the schools and parents back and forth. Since COVID, really our volunteer situation has really changed, and there's not very many volunteers in the schools, but I've been lucky that my principal has been supportive of letting volunteers be in the library. And I don't know if it's because it's a much bigger space than in the classrooms and with germs and stuff, but she has actually pushed and been okay with me having my volunteers, even when they were kind of, kind of discouraging volunteers in the classrooms. I think she went to bat for me being able to keep them in the library, which is great this last year.
It's so nice when people understand the reasons why we do what we do. So I'm really curious because Ashley, your quads, how old are they now?
8.
All right. And is it fair to assume that you've participated in supporting their classroom teacher along the way since they started in kindergarten?
Yes, I actually, in kindergarten, I was in both of their classrooms for an hour a week, as well as if their teacher needed any help with anything, she knew to just give me a call or an email.
And she has 2 in one class and 2 in the other. That's why she says both.
You know, I think that's incredible. As a mother of twins, I felt like I was being incredibly efficient in my parenting, but I imagine with quads, it's a whole different story. So let's go ahead and let me ask, let's see, Ashley, can you tell me what kinds of familiarity did you have with the workings of the school library before you started volunteering with Liz?
Well, when I was in college, I actually worked for 2 years in our school library. So I was familiar with all of the Dewey Decimal System and everything and understood how that all works and stuff.
Excellent. And how about you, Katie? Did you have any appreciation for the inner workings of a library before you got started with Liz?
Yeah, I would say I'm kind of a rare gem of a volunteer because I actually have my master's in school library work. I've been home with my kids all these years and just haven't been ready to go back to work. And when she was like, volunteers, I raised my hand and ran as fast as I could to get back into the library world.
Well, look at you. You've got work experience. And at some point, Liz, you're going to be losing one of your volunteers and you're going to be asked to write a letter of recommendation. Because I bet, Katie, do they have a teacher shortage in Nebraska like they do in everywhere else in the United States?
Most definitely, yeah.
How is it you have managed to sort of ignore this has never happened in my lifetime. 25 years in the world of teaching, and the first time I've heard they have a teacher shortage, I thought it was I don't know what to think. I had never heard those two words put together in my lifetime. So, but Katie, I can imagine that any job you apply for, you're going to be getting because you have first an excellent opportunity to learn from an expert like Liz. So, lost my space. All right. So, friends, Liz was very kind to include her notes for volunteer orientation in our show notes. Liz, I can appreciate the need to utilize volunteers in a way that enables you to focus on your library tasks. Could you share with us how you decided to include volunteers in your everyday?
Yeah. I have volunteers pretty much the whole entire day. So I have a schedule Monday through Friday from 9 o'clock when the kids come to the library all the way to the end of the day at 3:45-ish when the kids are gone. The only time that's off is over the lunch hour. And then I have my plan periods. And most of the time, if it's first hour of the day or last hour of the day, it changes every single day. That if the volunteer doesn't want to stay or come in late, it's up to the volunteer. But I have some volunteers that take projects home and do other displays and stuff like that. It's really up to the volunteer. But so I have a schedule and about, 8 to 12 volunteers a week that come in on a certain day, and they do everything from checking in, checking out, shelving, helping the kids find books, repairing books, putting my holds in, helping the kids go to the bathrooms.
Well, that alone, can I just say, I have not met anybody who's been lucky enough to have a girls and boys restroom in their library space. But for me, it was like sometimes down a flight of stairs if my students wanted to. And of course, you've got that sort of copycat syndrome. It's sort of like a sort of, you see one need to go to the restroom and all of a sudden everybody has this inspiration that they have to go. And and that can, I mean, I'm going to say this, when all the hands went in the air, we took a little walking field trip to the bathroom, and that's what we did during library. And it was not my favorite day. And at that point, we had a conversation with the teacher and saying, before you come to special, is there any way y'all could like go to the bathroom first? Because that would be fantastic. Oh my gosh.
Yes. So, and then, I mean, we just had a lot of COVID money, so we were able to order about $24,000 worth of new books. And so my volunteers have been working so hard to help me process all those books and do displays. And so there's no way that I would be able to do it without my fabulous volunteers.
Well, and I know in an elementary school, especially if you're on a fixed schedule, your first priority is to teach, and you're with those kids, and so everything else becomes sort of back burner. It's like we're going to get to that eventually. And friends, that is an excellent reminder that if your district hasn't spent their COVID money, it might not be a bad idea to find out where all that money has been distributed, because it is there is a requirement. Federal funding has to be spent. There are always deadlines when all that has to be done. And I, for one, am making a mental note myself. Liz, listeners are going to want to know, when it comes to training your volunteers, is this something that you do during the regular school day, or is this something you try and do, after hours or when the students aren't in the library?
Definitely after hours. There's no way I can train when kids are in there. I train the volunteers before the school year starts, and it's pretty much about an hour and a half ahead of time, or a session, and I did it in small groups or individually with each individual volunteer. Ashley, this is her second year volunteering. This is Katie's first year volunteering, but I go over pretty much step by step. And then the class period is so fast that, it's like I can quick show something to Katie or Ashley or one of my volunteers, but there's no way you can train while you have 25 kids in the library. It's, maybe a couple sentences here or there.
That makes sense. Liz, I know that this is something that whenever we have adults who are not faculty or staff members in our spaces, when you're introducing community volunteers, parent volunteers who are going to be having access to your circulation software and your students' personal information. Liz, can you tell us, how did you broach this sensitive topic with your volunteers?
During their training, I talked specifically about sensitive information, that when kids are checking out, whatever types of books that they're checking out, how to approach that, and that we don't share that information with anybody else. We don't share information about book finds. Really, we don't share information, notes, or I put sometimes notes on their files from one student, from a parent, that they might have, about if a student can't check out a certain type of book or something like that. And I talk to the volunteers that those things are not to be shared with other people and that it's personal, private information. And, especially in this time and age, there's a lot of things that are happening in our world right now with LGBT and the books that are in our collections. And so you just have to be sensitive to lots of different topics.
Well, and I do want to ask Ashley, because Ashley, you said you have volunteered in the classroom. Would you be comfortable sharing, has a teacher ever given you any sort of expectations when it came to privacy and the goings on in the classrooms and what should or shouldn't be shared once you leave the classroom?
Not really, only because it's just expected. It's common sense that you don't discuss anything outside the classroom, that kind of thing. But no, for the most part, usually when I was in the classroom, I was off just running errands for them, things that they didn't have time to do. And so, yeah, projects that they needed to finish, things to put together, things like that.
Got it. I'm thinking because I'm very aware in the elevators at hospitals, there will be a message in the elevators of hospitals, and it'll say, and it's a message that says, reminder, all information pertaining to patients is confidential and should not be discussed in public spaces. And that is being directed towards the employees of the hospital. And I think sometimes it's, the expectation is when you're working in your kid's school that you're just there, cutting out laminate and you're, stapling and you're making bulletin boards and you couldn't possibly come across anything private. And yet, we have a lot of accommodations that are being made for students and things that have been, agreed upon in closed door meetings with families. And when you work with the students as much as you do, and it sounds like you work with students all day long as volunteers, it sounds like you come into contact with basically every single student who's going to come and check out books that day. So, wow. All right. So, Katie, let's ask, I'd love to get your opinion, especially because you are a school librarian. I'd like to know, Katie, what do you think now that you've seen the behind the scenes in a school library up close and personal?
Well, I haven't been in a school library since I had my kids, so 7 years ago. I tell you, my respect for school librarians has grown immensely. The amount of work that they have to do is just incredible. And I also just have so much respect for Liz. She really lets her volunteers be creative, interact with the kids. And to say I get the most out of my small time that I'm there on Thursdays is, I look forward to Thursdays the most of my week, for sure.
Aw. But can I ask you, is there certain aspects of your volunteering that you enjoy, especially given that you have training in being a school librarian?
I'm a total dork, and I absolutely love to process the new books. I love that aspect of it. I'm that person that when I come and the cart is full, I'm like, yes, that's for me. But also just sharing my love of books with the kids and seeing them get so excited to run up to me and, Miss Katie, look what the book I found. And even if I've never read it, I'm like, that's the coolest book I've ever seen, because it's a book. And I just absolutely love the interaction that I have with the kids.
Oh, that's wonderful. So, Ashley, I'm curious, what is it about being in the school library that you find interesting? What are the things that you enjoy doing when you go to work in the library?
Well, I would have to say first, I agree with Katie on processing the new books. That's always so exciting to see what new things have come out. And as well as I lately have been really interested in all the new options, new and old options for chapter books and what the kids are reading now and trying to branch out and see where my kids will be reading and things like that, as well as just interacting with the kids. They get excited about something. And there have been a couple times when like the kindergartners run up to me to tell me something and I'm like, what did they say? But they're so excited that I'm like, okay, yay! I have no idea what they were telling me, but sure. One time Liz set that up. She had them come tell me something and I was like, what? What are we talking about? But it just how excited the kids are when they get into the library.
So you both happen to be parents of children in the school. So Katie, I'm curious, the fact that you have, and will that you next year you'll have 2 children in the school, does that change how you look at books in the library and what books you would like your own children to be checking out? I mean, I think I remember when I had children the same age as my students, I felt a particular affinity because to me, I could readily identify with students this age because I was raising them at home. What do you think, Katie?
Yeah, I'm just check out whatever. I like when my kids bring home broad topic books and things we can discuss on. And even though my first grader tends to bring home the same few books every single time, which I'm like, okay, Fancy Nancy's great. Let's try something else for a little while. But, and with all of the new books that come through the library, that's really broadened her horizons as well.
Well, and how about you, Ashley? I mean, you've got 5 kids who are regularly going to the library. I'm sure you see at least 1 or 2 of them when you happen to be in the building. As their mom, do you find that this, the fact that you're also working in their library has any sort of opportunity that you can interact with your children?
Well, definitely just one set of my kids, their classroom is right across from the library, so they see me all the time. And so they have to wave every time. And otherwise, as far as like what they're looking for and stuff in books, I talk to Liz regularly. I'm like, okay, this kid needs help branching out or things like that. Cause they're having trouble choosing a book, things like that. And so I know that she's a resource, and then I pass that along to them or bring home books for them and help them get excited about it.
Well, and absolutely. You have this access to this amazing collection. Membership has its privileges, and there are definitely some perks to being a volunteer in your kids' library. In addition to being able to work in the library, you can also check out books for your kids, or your kids can check out as many books as they want. Is that right? And Katie, does your child take advantage of this at all? I mean, I imagine that they sort of have to sort of squirrel those books away and make sure their friends don't see how many they get to take home.
I would say mine does not take advantage. She's a little stickler to, I have to take my 2 books back every single week. However, I don't follow the rule, and I'm always like, oh, Liz, I'm taking that stack of new books home. And so I would say my student doesn't, but I do.
Excellent. How about you, Ashley?
I'm kind of in the same boat. My kids are often pretty much, they'll take their book back right away, with the exception if they go to the library on a special session to get a stack of books. There, every once in a while, Liz will bring a kid in and let them check out a bunch. And yeah, then in that case, then they'll have a bunch.
One aside to what Ashley and Katie were saying is one benefit of volunteering in the library is all the kids have a 5-book limit on theirs, but if your parents volunteer, you have an unlimited number of books.
Question for the mom of quads. We could use some pro tips on how to get, now you have 5 children total. How do you make sure those library books don't get lost in your house? That they all make their way back to the library, given that you work in the library?
Well, up until this year, their books, if they pulled them out of their backpack, they read it and they immediately had to go back in their backpack. We've gotten a little laxer this year, but also all of our bookcases and everything are down in our living room. So any books that are upstairs, it's easy to tell, as well as I have my own catalog system at home that is completely different from the library. So I can look and be like, oh, that one's not one of ours. It's a similar thing to the Dewey Decimal, but on a very simple home level.
Well, and again, incorporating those librarian tricks at home to keep your own personal library organized. I always talk to my students about, the books at home are your library. A library is just a collection of books, and you have a library at home. And the fun thing is that you can borrow books from your brothers and sisters if they have books that they're willing to share, and you just have to be really nice to them and make sure that you bring them back. So you guys can practice that at home. All right. So, Liz, I'm wondering, given that your volunteers interact with all the students at the circulation desk, what coaching do you do with your volunteers when it comes to respecting student choice?
Well, from the very beginning, when we start the orientation, I say the most important thing is for every kid to come in to the library seeing themselves as readers and good readers. And so we celebrate reading in here. I don't always know the kids' reading levels, and I don't give reading tests in the library. If a kid reads one page of a book, a paragraph of a book, a whole book, we celebrate whatever they've read. And so school book choice is really important. And so as really young kids, we have certain areas, of course, like kindergarten, they pick from, a certain area, and then it branches out as they get older. But it's all about choice in the library. And so from the volunteer orientation all the way through, we just celebrate reading in the library, and it's all about choice. And so the volunteers kind of celebrate reading with me for the kids. So.
Well, and I know that we say that. I love hearing how on board your volunteers are. I have had firsthand experience working with individuals who do not share the same philosophy when it comes to book checkout and reading on level. I've worked with educators who don't share the same sort of freedom of choice and respecting the students when they make the choices that they do and the books that they do. So it's incredibly fortunate that you can work with a team who all espouse the same philosophy and respect student choice. Liz, you did mention that you have other jobs for your volunteers, and I was hoping you could mention, obviously we've got the circulation responsibilities and the shelving responsibilities, and it sounds like Katie has decided she's going to be processing your books for you, which is just absolutely fantastic until you run out of books for her to process. But, there's always something on the back burner. I just feel like school librarians always have something that we can be working on, and it seems like we have things we can just fill every minute of the day with. What other responsibilities have you been able to allocate to your volunteer team?
We have a lot of kids that put books on hold. And so we constantly have a holds program that is going. We have displays that we are putting up and that are frequently changed. And so I have some volunteers that work on those. We are in the process of, we're going to be starting a diversity scavenger hunt with diverse authors, and that have not only ones with disabilities, but also ethnically diverse and racially diverse authors and illustrators. And so a couple of my volunteers are working on that project, and we're doing a massive weeding project, and that's kind of an ongoing project. And so it's never ending. There's just constant projects happening in the library.
One thing that I found that I've never had to do before, but I have in this particular collection because of where the windows are situated, even though we have the blinds mostly closed, the call numbers, the ink has faded on them. And so one of the jobs that I have been able to give to, in this case, it's my assistant, is literally recreating the call numbers for my books because you can't read them. They have all bleached in the sun. So that's another thing. It's hugely satisfying, though. The before and the after shots, you're like, oh my gosh. You went from not being able to read any of our call numbers. And of course, librarians see the problem. Non-librarians are like, what's the problem? The books look great. And you're like, I can't read any of the call numbers. Liz, when it comes to training your volunteers to read one-on-one with the students, would you talk with us a little bit about these volunteers? Because I know that Ashley and Katie are working your CERT desk and doing a lot of the sort of day-to-day, but you do have a group who come and read with your students. Is that correct?
Yes, that's a new program that I've developed. I call it the Grandparent One-to-One Reading Program. And so right now I have 2 grandparents that come twice a week in the afternoons, and they read one-to-one with students for 15 minutes for about 3 hours twice a week. And so I think they have like 18 kids maybe that they're reading with, and they're all kids that have been referred either because of lack of reading skills or needing reading support, or some TLC is what we call it, or a combination of the two. And so we just had our first 2 graduate out of the program, and we're getting another 2 into it, and then the other 16 are continuing on this quarter. So
wow. And these are grandparents that are being brought in. Explain to me the part where students get referred. So this is a program where you are going to support really all grade levels, and they can ask for this opportunity for their particular students in their grade levels to be supported with one-to-one reading with a grandparent.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I sent an email out to our school counselor, principal, assistant principal, and all the classroom teachers. And then I just said, okay, give me some names of the students that you think would be good for this program. And then we worked out the schedule, and the teachers called the parents, and we got it to work out. So
that's fantastic. And, I want to think that would, what a wonderful opportunity to utilize an incredibly patient, group of individuals who would love to spend some time with children reading. Now, do the kids get to bring what they want to read, or are there going to be things that the volunteers are going to be reading with them?
It's set in our library, and we have the kids come to the library, or the grandparent goes and gets them from the classroom, brings them down to the library, and the student picks the book with the grandparent. And so some of the time the grandparent will read to the student, or the student can read to the grandparent. We have one teacher that has the student bring a leveled reader that the student can read to the grandparent, but then the rest of the time the grandparent reads to the student. So it's anything from a Harry Potter book to a Lego book to anything in between. So.
Well, and again, you mentioned earlier in the conversation that there were budget cuts, and having, even paras come in to do reading support to the classrooms. I know having volunteers just to do one-to-one reading with our students is invaluable, especially if in a circumstance where we just can't hire the staff support to do something like that. And the fact is you're building that collaborative relationship with like your reading specialist, and you're adding value to your program as a school librarian, because you are supporting a need that is clearly necessary to be supported in the classrooms. And so I love that it's an opportunity for you to raise the profile of your library space in supporting a need that your building has. Oh, that's amazing. So Ashley, you're incredibly committed to your role as a volunteer in the school library. What is it that energizes you as a volunteer in this library?
Well, for one thing, getting out of the house. I've been a stay-at-home mom since my quads were born, and so yeah, this is the opportunity to go and see other people, interact with adults, but as well as interact with other kids that are not my own, kids that might actually listen and not just argue with me. And the kids are just so excited to have people there that want to help them with their reading and stuff, things like that, that it's just fun to go. It's fun to be there.
Do you miss your brain? I missed having, I remember I started library school when my twins were 18 months old because I was quite convinced that there was nothing left up there after having 3 children under 3. And so, yeah, I mean, I find that the work in the library is incredibly engaging, that it requires a certain amount of attention and you're like, I can do this. I'm just... I can only imagine you probably can identify with that.
I definitely can. Yeah, I have a lot of time where I'm completely forgetful, but at least when I go to the library, there's a set plan of what I need to do every day. And I get in there and there's sometimes a challenge or something different to do. But at the same time, it's usually pretty standard. You help the kids check in their books, check all the books, put them away, and help them check out again, as well as help them find a book if they need some help.
You get to work with adults. I have adult conversation.
Exactly.
And we laugh a lot.
Oh, how about you, Katie?
I'm along with Ashley. I've been home with my kids, so getting me out of the house. My husband and I joke, we call it that I'm practicing for the work world again. And, I've had a rough couple years with my health. And so to be in that library focusing on something else has been, dare I say, life-changing for me. It puts my mind on something else. And like Liz said, we just have a lot of fun the entire time we're there. It doesn't even feel like when she asks you to do a task, you just do it because it's a fun task. And like, she doesn't ever have to beg us to do anything. At least not me.
Liz, you must be doing something right to have such a devoted team of followers. I think listeners want to know what you're doing to retain your volunteers, because we have discussed a little bit about the investment of time it takes to train your team of volunteers. You don't want to have to do this every couple weeks because somebody's leaving. What do you do to ensure that your volunteers continue and to stay with the program and give you that kind of committed, dedicated support?
Well, I always joke that I I bribe my students with books. That's why they like the library. And I thank my volunteers with kids' hugs and in laughter. Because I think in the library as a volunteer, we just laugh a lot. At school, there's a lot of, and, in the classroom, there's a lot of hard things that go on, with grades or with disappointment and stuff like that. But in the library, a lot of that's gone. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of, oh, I got a new dinosaur book, or, the fun things that happen at school happen in the library, especially if you like to read, And so I think as a volunteer, I hope I show love to my volunteers and my students show love to the volunteers. And I hope that helps to keep them energized to keep volunteering.
Well, and I think there's a certain camaraderie because you're the only adults in the room. I remember fondly, especially when working with littles, having this sort of, just inner dialogue, and this little dialogue going on with my in this case, it was my assistant, because we might have 27 6-year-olds and it's the only 2 non-6-year-olds in the room. It really is a sanity check. You're just like, I really can do my job so much better knowing that there's somebody else here in the room.
Yes, in the afternoons, both Katie and Ashley can attest that after we've just had our 2nd grade, kindergarten, 1st grade rotations, we look at each other and we're like, we did it. We survived.
Well, and having had to work by myself, having another adult be a part of a space that can be very busy is incredibly validating. I feel like there's a true partnership there when you realize that this job would not be nearly as gratifying without them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love my volunteers. I couldn't do it without them.
Well, and having tried, it isn't pretty. It isn't pretty. No. My assistant had a family obligation and I had to function by myself. And it was ugly. I found myself being stretched and not being able to do all the things I customarily do. And I was just feeling generally like a disappointment to my teachers and my students.
Yeah.
So, Liz, what advice would you give to listeners who are looking to replicate your success in their programs?
I really worked hard on using social media to get the word out. We had our school Facebook account. I used our PTO account to branch out with the word to get recruits. I also just contacted a lot of past parents from my school and just asked if people would volunteer. And, I was really lucky to get volunteers that way. And also realize that it's a pretty big commitment on the training side ahead of time, that, thinking that it's going to be just like a volunteer in a classroom. It's not, because I've had volunteers in a classroom, and that's very different than in a library setting, because it's not just, grade some spelling tests and call it good. There's a lot more pieces to it.
Well, and we have had, I can speak from personal experience. We've had, classroom assistants assume that if they become library assistants, that's just a turnkey. You just walk in there and hit the ground running as library assistants. And there is very little that transfers in the way of being a classroom assistant to working in the library behind the circ desk and being able to make sure that everything runs smoothly. Ashley, you have made a commitment to the school and to this library program. And can you share with listeners, because a lot of librarians would like to know, what is it that Liz is doing well that gives you the motivation to come back every single week?
While not perfectly organized, she has everything set up in the library so that you can easily figure out where things go. You can figure out what you need to do, as well as, at least for a while, we had a volunteer basket specifically so that we could look in there and say, oh, this is what I need to do today. Now we kind of are all used to what we need to do, so we don't need to go and decide. We can just say, oh, there's a pile there. I can take care of that, and I can take care of this. And if it comes down to it and we just need to check shelves, we do that. There are so many times when you walk the shelves and wow, things are a mess all of a sudden. And it's usually, I've had it usually after a class that comes through, and the class is still in the library. And I'm like, wow, they destroyed this. And I actually have several times gone to Liz and said, this class didn't put stuff back the way they were supposed to right after checking with books. And so then she had to have a talk with them about making sure they put their books back in the correct places and things like that.
Well, and what I'm hearing is that Liz did a really good job of setting you up for success and created situations where you were going to succeed and you were going to feel that success in a way that validates your time spent there. You weren't tearing your hair out and you weren't feeling at all stressed when you were doing what you were doing. And I also hear that you had agency, that if there were things that needed to be done, you could show that initiative and do those things, that you had that opportunity to show some agency in that space. So, Katie, I do hope that you're taking notes, because at some point you're going to have your own library. And Katie, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to, because listeners are dying to know, how long do you think you're going to stay a volunteer before you decide, I can do this? I have seen this in live time. I can become a school librarian and I can have my own library. It's all a matter of making that decision. That has to be like somewhere in the corner of your mind thinking, maybe is this the year I'm going to become a librarian, or maybe not?
Boy, after watching Liz's program, though, it's a lot to live up to. And I can totally see how difficult it is to be a one-man show in a library. So I'm not rushing at the moment. I'm still learning and immersing myself in the library world, but Liz does such a good job of just communicating with us. I think that's key. And I also love how she says, after you shelve the books, join the lesson. I think that's one of my favorite things. So after I shelve books, if there's nothing pressing that I need to do, I love to join the lesson. She even let me read a book a few times to the kids. She just she values our time, and I feel valued, and I'll keep coming back, Liz.
As a pre-service school librarian, you've gotten better work experience than anything I ever had. I truly, the first time I walked into a library, it was my library, and I had no idea what I was doing. So that's amazing. Whenever, Katie, you decide you're going to jump ship and get your own library, I can guarantee you will be an instant success and you will hit the ground running. Liz, I'd love for you to share with us, how can we follow you on social media?
I just have my personal Facebook account, Elizabeth Lynn, on Facebook, and I'm at Kehoe Elementary School.
Fantastic. And friends, we'll make sure to include some links in the show notes to Liz's school library. I think we'd all like to maybe get some visuals if we could. That would be fantastic. Awesome. Liz, thank you so much for making this episode possible. Katie and Ashley, I am so grateful that you took some time away from your family so that you could share with us all that you love about volunteering in this amazing library program that Liz has created. And I hope you all have an amazing spring. And friends, do take care of yourselves and have a wonderful last, couple months of school before the summer starts.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Friends, I am so incredibly grateful to Liz and Ashley and Katie, and if you have ever tried to coordinate something with 4 adults, you will appreciate the extra effort that this does take when all of us are trying to make sure that we're all in the same place at the same time across 2 time zones. So thank you so very much, Liz, Ashley, and Katie. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. One last friendly reminder, I encourage you to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more using the code UNITED. The topic of our next episode will be inclusive libraries and my conversation with Julie Stivers. I hope you will tune in.